Dr. Anthony Gustin, such a pleasure to have you here today. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, my man. Appreciate it.
So, one thing that has stood out to me is you've done such great work in education, but you've also built some incredible businesses and you've had a lot of success on that business end. And that was one of the things that really excited me about having you here today is I am about a month away from the launch of my first business in the health and wellness space. So I
Congrats. Can
wanted
you
to
say what it is?
yeah, so it's it's about lab work. So I'm going to be selling
Sweet.
selling lab work, and then it's going to be based on people's needs. So it'll be specific packages based on people with autoimmune disease or people who are overweight, and so it'd be kind of more tailored towards what people need. Um, but I was wondering, what do you think some of the key lessons are that you learned through your entrepreneurship journey?
Oh man. How long you got? There yeah, I mean I think the biggest one for me that I've tried to stay true to is just build good stuff and like build things that I want to exist. And I think a lot of times people end up trying to figure out how to just have a good idea and deliver based upon what they think is what people want. But the best way to know what's going to be a good product is to use it and want it and need it yourself and then make it after that. That's been the principle that I've done a lot of the stuff that, I mean, even the information that I've posted,
Hmm.
podcasts that I've done have been mostly exploratory, trying to learn myself. This stuff that I've posted has been mostly me researching or reading a book and thinking, oh shit, I should have known this before. I wish other people knew this, and posting it. And so
Hmm.
that's kind of, it's been driving me forward from the beginning. And all the stuff that I've done is make things for myself, or maybe like me a month ago or a year ago would have wanted. And that seems to have been working really well.
It's such a great heuristic, just because like we have this view. I think creating content, it's a great analogy for this, is like you have this imposter syndrome, or you just don't know whether what you're going to create the world is going to want. But if you create for yourself, then you know that there's at least one person out there who is interested in that product. So I think it's just a great way of thinking about business and thinking about social media in general.
Yeah, I think the antithesis to that is actually caring a lot about the outcome, which I think when you're early on, you sort of have to a certain degree to make sure that you can pay your bills and pay rent and eat food, like
Hmm.
some of the important things. You need to make money, and that's just the world we live in. But at the end of the day, giving a shit about the outcomes of how many followers or likes you're going to get, or how many sales you're going to have, or how the business is going to grow sort of gets in the way. And they're metrics that come by building things that people want and by providing value. And so I think that as long as you're providing value and making things that people want from content or products or whatever, services, I think that that's really, focusing on that as much as possible. And then the outcome will be whatever it is sort of, again, like I would suggest people not worry about the outcome. Anytime I've done that, it's made me miserable and it hasn't worked.
It's a great point. I think about the podcast, right? It's like so easy to fall into the trap of looking at those analytics and getting somewhat attached to the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and for as much as I say that, and I say that I don't care about how many people listen, there's still that part of me that looks and checks and sees how it's doing. So, have you kind of learned to disconnect from that to a certain degree? Like, did was that a struggle for you?
Yeah, I've effectively not been on social media for the last like 4 or 5 months. So that's how I've done it recently. Uh, and I'm in the middle of building a lot of new stuff right now. And so I've just kind of been heads down grinding,
Mm.
standing some new stuff up and working on some new businesses. And it was too much for me in that time of being busy. I also moved across the country, had some other life stuff change. And there's just times where if I pay attention, I notice my ability to interact online on social media is fine. And sometimes I know it just like pulls me into the abyss and makes me a worse person in many ways. And whenever I notice that, I just try to take a break
Hmm.
and get off as much as possible. I don't think that's probably the best thing for growing an audience. Uh, but yeah, it's a way that I've had to work with it. I prefer building more than posting stuff on social media anyways. And not to slight people who do that. I think that's building as well, of like putting out content and writing stuff. I find my skills to be better suited at making things.
Yeah, it's so cool to think about, and to think about how you've um, evolved your thought over the years? Like, it was an interesting thing in preparing for this episode to see how you've evolved, and kind of just how even just the way you talk about things has seemed to somewhat switch. How do you think you've changed since you've started creating content? Like, is it 6 years, 5, 6 years now?
I think my first blogs I started writing were in 2012.
Mm, so longer than that. We're almost
Yeah,
coming
I
on
don't think
11,
any of
12.
those are on the internet anymore. I think that hopefully I'll deleted all of those. But it came from me of just basically not wanting to repeat myself to the patients I had in my clinic, and just saying like, hey, I have these things on why you should be eating grass-fed meats. You should go here and read why. And uh, it's always I've kind of struggled of being consistent, I would say, and I think it's more of like the way social media has been able to change my psychology. Like I feel that resistance and I kind of like need to take some breaks and then get back into it. But as far as like my perspective and what's changed, there's been a huge shift from worrying about specific biomarkers or measuring things like from a biohacking way, quantifying physical health effectively is how I would categorize that, and shifting it more into the way I feel and the connectedness I have to both myself and things around me. And that may be other people, the work that I'm doing, nature, etc. And I've just gotten so much more out of that way of thinking about my existence. I mean, it's like so much was around if I have better or the best physical health. You know, again, it's like looking at the outcomes. We're alive as human beings and we have experience of reality. And I think that one of the most modifiable things you can do for sure is work on your physical health. But I think once you get a lot of foundations down, it's actually all noise and a big distraction from what really matters. There's a lot of people in the health space who are talking about how many degrees in a sauna it needs to be before you get in, or how many minutes, or if it should be before a workout or after, in the beginning of the day or the end of the day. And I know a lot of these people, and they're all pretty miserable. And I just went down that route as well, and just noticed that optimizing for the small physical health quantifiable outcomes did not make me happy, did not make me less anxious, did not make me feel more loved, did not make me a better husband, did not make me a better friend, didn't make me a better person for society. Like there's so many things that felt empty after that, even though I had quantifiably great health.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's been a huge shift for me getting into farming, figuring out a lot of different connectedness to nature, and shifting my point of view, like, you know, to go back to the beginning of the conversation, to more inputs instead of outputs, and more like, what am I actually doing and what are the habits in my life? And that has been much more beneficial to me than trying to figure out what is my HRV after I sleep in a night, or what is this, you know, which again, I think that, not to talk bad about these things, I think they're great tools for certain times. I think people get obsessed with the process of looking at the outcomes and sort of lose the point of living and the actual experience they're having as a human.
It's interesting, especially when you talk about like things like the sleep data, for example, where I could wake up one morning and feel great, but I look at my readiness score and it's like a 71. And then subconsciously, I have this like
Mm-hmm.
nocebo effect in the back of my head that's plaguing me throughout the day. It's making me a little more tired, and it's giving me an excuse when I'm on my run to go a little less hard. And I think it applies to not only just that example, but to like seed oils, for example. Like, is that awareness that there are seed oils in this meal, or there might be seed oils in this meal that I'm eating, making the outcome worse? Um, it's an interesting balance between like this optimization and this somewhat just enjoying the moment and enjoying life. And it's a weird balance in the modern world because there's so many things poisoning you, but you also can't be so stressed out and anxious about everything. It's a hard line to balance.
Yeah, I don't have this study uh, handy as far as the title or the researchers, but I've seen plenty where if somebody is told that something has sugar in it versus not, their blood sugar actually spikes more when they're eating it, or if they say that, hey, this is a more inflammatory or more processed food that has worse outcomes. So for sure, I think that there's an element of that. And I think that there is a lot of orthorexia in the sort of health community, which is totally fine to make lifestyle decisions. And I just try to set up my life again, like to the inputs of, I want to recreate effectively the most human-like environment, human-like zoo cage that I can exist in. Because as much as I think we'd all want to be, there's no going back. We can't live as hunter-gatherers. And yeah, this has been my quest. How do you recreate that and not have to worry about all the other details? So like, I just put in guardrails to not have to freak out if I go out and have dinner and there, I order around it and I feel fine. If there's a little bit of seed oils here or there, like I'm not gonna flail my arms and run out of the restaurant crying, like I think a lot of other health influencers may do. But yeah, it's just what can you actually control? How can you have positivity about it? It's a big thing.
Yeah, and that reconnecting with nature, like it's one thing with you. I've definitely kept my eye on because the when I look at your journey, it's funny because you had all the success creating businesses, and then you kind of ventured out and moved to a more simple life, farming and doing these things that are more physically intensive, but maybe not um, financially the thing that's going to make you rich, but you already had that first thing that made you the money, and that's kind of the direction I ultimately want to go in as well, is doing this business thing and then eventually getting to a point where I can organize my life in a way that's reconnected with nature, and that I live on a farm and I take care of animals and all this type of stuff. What has your experience been like with that pursuit?
I think it's probably the worst career move I could have made in my life. But I'm a person that just generally, it's really hard for me to work on things that I'm not interested in.
Yeah, totally.
And for me, it was just a burning, like, insatiable desire to figure out how the food system worked from a farming perspective, and just also like how we live our lives,
Mm-hmm.
and thinking about how am I mean, there's like going from being in my clinic day to day, working with people hands on, to running businesses that are super large behind a computer with a remote team, to being on a farm. Like those are very, very different lifestyles. And I'm not about all or none in any of those respects. I think that the integration and connectedness of those things, I think, are what interests me the most. And so for my wife and I, it was a big trial of what does our life look like when we live in this way? And I think a lot of people tend to idealize it. It's a lot of work. And I think there are a lot of downsides to it. I think there are a lot of upsides. I think we just moved off of our farm like 2 months ago. So we just ended that chapter. It was a couple of years. There's a variety of reasons why. But one of the biggest things was it was very socially isolating. Even though we had a great community in Austin and had a lot of friends, thinking about having kids, which is something we're preparing for, out on acreage in the middle of rural Texas did not excite us. I mean, I think that when you look at how do you recreate that human zoo cage, there are other humans in it. Mm-hmm. And the model we have now of living on land where you have nuclear families and that's it. And the closest friends we had, really good friends, 20 minutes away. Even our neighbors, like you don't spend, like a lot of people don't live out there. They're part-time and there's no community. You have to seek it. And so we just had to have the question of, do we want to be around? Like what are we optimizing for, trying to recreate a normal human environment right now? And I think that it's very abnormal to live with very few people on a lot of land. That's probably more abnormal than living in a city where you have a lot of people and a lot of connectedness. And I, for sure, am going to get back on land at some point. But it's not going to be with just our family. We're going to figure out how to do it in a very different way. And I know many farmers who are burned out, and I have the conversations weekly with people, friends of mine, all around the world who have the same problem of how do we create social bonds and community and that tribe element while living on land. And I don't have any excellent answers currently, but that's for sure something that is a huge part of what, at least this phase that we're going into, starting a family, is really important for us.
It's a great perspective because people do romanticize that farm life. But if you look at like the blue zones, for example, like such a big element of why people are able to live a long time and live these happy lives is because community. because they have these social bonds with the people around them. And yeah, what's next when you think about that in terms of, so you just left the farm, what's that next step, or where are you heading to, and what does that look like for you?
So we're in Oregon. We're in Central Oregon, small town, and it's a blend that we've gotten here of trying to figure out like how can I spend a lot of time outside and have vast nature to interact with while still having a community of people that I really enjoy to be around. And so we found it here, and we're really, really, really grateful and lucky to have that. And so honestly, there's obviously have a luxury to, like you said, had success earlier and be able to focus on a lot of these things, but it's a lot of work. It's very obvious to me that when you move in a place, like each time I've moved in the past, I've had something and a reason to have moved there, school, work, etc. This is one of the first times that I've moved and haven't had that anchoring, and trying to reestablish a tribe and a life where you feel connected to place is a lot of work. It's a significant amount of work. And so not only that, I'm trying to figure out how does one outside of a farm environment or living on land in a place like this, like how do you, like where's the balance of getting nature and getting connected to nature and being connected to people? And what does that look like? Does that look like living on land 5 minutes at the city and then you driving in and you don't have a lot of friction? Or does it look like living in the city and going out into the woods every day?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that there's any one answer. Uh, and then just beyond that, like how do you really create community in an environment where it was, I mean, to be totally honest, like it was kind of tough in Austin at a certain point of once it got to a certain size and us being there for a while, there's a certain element of having millions of people in the city that make it really challenging to maintain the social bonds that you would have in a much smaller place that humans have had throughout all of human history. So these are some of the things I'm thinking about. And I don't have any answers whatsoever. But yeah, this is what I find really interesting right now.
I find it really interesting as well because so I just graduated college a few months ago, and I'm trying to kind of balance that for myself. Like, where should I go? Do I go to Austin where there's this like community of people who um, are all kind of in this world of like health and podcasting and all this type of stuff? Do I go down to Miami and live more like in the sun and on the beach and stuff like that, or um, do I save some money and stay at home? And like these questions of where to live and why we should live there, I think that hearing you speak on those topics just kind of reassuring to understand that there's probably not one answer to it, and it's something that will evolve.
Another thing that's changed for me is stopping the decision making from coming from an intellectual point and starting to make more decisions based upon an intuitive sense and how does my body feel when I think about these decisions. And especially in the three big areas in life that are sort of what make up your entire reality, which is where you live, who you spend time with, and what you work on. So for example, in Oregon here, we had some fires and smoke rolled in, and I had an immediate urge, an instinctual urge to get the hell out of here. Makes sense, right? There's a fire going on, and our subconscious sort of like runs the show to a great degree, and our focused consciousness is not using that much of our brain or our body to actually make decisions. We have the illusion that it does. And so I've started to try to put myself in scenarios where, for example, when we decided we were going to leave Austin, we traveled around to a bunch of different places and try to tune in, like, how do we actually physically feel here? Are we excited? Do we feel alive? Do we feel full of energy? And still have some of the scaffolding of like, I used my brain to make a spreadsheet to be like, okay, here are the places that we should go. And then we went there and tried to feel like, what does it feel like to actually be here? And where we're at now is like undeniable. Like, oh, this is it. This is home. Like when we started thinking about it in that way. And I've done the same thing now with work and how I spend my time. And the same thing happened when my wife and I figured out we were in love. Like it wasn't anymore like an intellectual thing where I was, oh, she must have these attributes. It was a felt sense, and I trust my body to give me the information that I need to make that decision, along with obviously the criteria that I had put together before. So I'd be curious for you, like what feels right to you? Like, have you thought about that before instead of? I mean, I think that all the things that you said, there's no wrong answer. There's different paths.
I think it's a I like as you were saying that, it makes me really want to go spend more time in Austin because all my internet friends live in Austin
Yeah, it's a
and
great,
I
great
haven't.
place to be
Great
for
place
if
to
you
be.
if you're trying to start a career in this space. Like, there's no better place to be, like, on paper.
Yep. But I haven't really even spent any time down there. All I know about it is what they've told me, and um, so I think that as you were saying that, what made sense to me was to just go spend maybe 2 weeks there, a month there, just kind of see how
Try
I
it on.
feel. Yeah,
Try it on. So I mean, that's the motto that my wife said when we were going places. She's like, "You got to go to know."
gotta go to know.
And just tune in and like sit with yourself and reflect, which is most people don't spend the time doing. Like, am I more energized here than like, how do I feel? How does my body feel? What is my subjective experience as a human in these places? Maybe you think Miami is really awesome. Like, I would try like not to let the FOMO of any one place get in the way of what your actual experience is.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think that like the community part is an interesting aspect of it as well because like um, Austin kind of has that community baked in it already, and I feel like in the other places I kind of need to form that for myself. Um, so it's a challenge, but it's going to be interesting to see how it unfolds. But I'm curious your thoughts when it comes to kind of the future of things. Like so much talk right now, ChatGPT, AI. Um, at the land is almost unfarmable in a lot of places. You see lab grown meat, like all these different things that if you watch the news too much, you will get terrified of like the future and like you have young kids, you're bringing people into this world. Like what do you make of this world that we're living in right now, and how do we create that better world going forward for ourselves and form that little bubble?
Yeah, I mean, this is another reason why I took a social media break, man.
Yeah, it's
It's
needed.
overwhelming. Yeah.
Overwhelming for sure.
Uh, I don't feel like things are going in the right direction collectively.
Hmm.
I think there's some seeds of hope, which is great. And ultimately, I think that, and this is also why I've tried to like really think about how I'm structuring my life around me. And that's all you can really do. And I generally think that the more you work on yourself, the better you can be for your own sort of reality, and then the people around you. Like, you're gonna have better impact that way and have more stability that way. It's, I mean, it comes back to like in-person communities, I think. And I've gone down the path of like totally like prepper mode, thinking, should I just get tons of acreage and be fully sustainable and all this type of stuff? And at the end of the day, I don't want to live my life in fear. And you got to have some hope. You got to attach to that and work on what you care about. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty strange times we're going through. I don't think it's, if you look at history, I don't think this hasn't happened before. We're just kind of going through repeatable cycles, which is totally normal. And I think that what people look at in the past is like, oh, we're going to have some giant collapse. I don't necessarily think that's, I think we're like living through it right now. I think that
Mm.
things are kind of like unraveling a little bit. I don't think that's necessarily bad. I think there's going to be a lot of suffering as it continues, which sucks. But at the end of the day, like, this is just what it is. And this is how it works. And this is how it, you know, life happens this way. So I try not to get fixed on it too much. If I do, I won't be able to sleep at night. And I've gone through every sort of like existential crisis when it comes to what is the future going to hold. And at the end of the day, like, just trying to figure out what can I have impact on. And for me, I care a lot about our food system. I mean, at the end of the day, if like, we don't know how to grow food, what is the point of anything? I think we've sort of stripped away our ability to live off the land from a food source, and we sort of like need to work with nature and be intentional to be able to grow our own food. And if we lose that wisdom and we don't have that safety net as things become, like you said, unfarmable, we become centralized, we use more technology, we get more room from nature. Like, I think that that's not a good direction to go. So those are the things I'm going to work on. Of like, I'm more of like, what do I want to exist instead of what do I not want to exist? Again, like trying to think of from hope instead of fear.
Hmm.
And I don't know exactly what that looks like right now. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I spent a lot of time farming, just try to figure out and learn like what are the issues that are facing small farmers right now. And small farmers meaning like 5, 20, 50, 100 acres. People who want to get into farming now, they face a tremendous amount of problems. I just podcasted with somebody right before this around even just distribution and processing. Like what happens from after the animal leaves the farm to when it gets on your plate, there are hundreds of issues to be solved. And this is where I think there's going to be a massive amount of overwhelm. But then to go back to what I was saying before, the best thing is to effectively focus on, I think, like concentric rings of what do you feel like? How are you doing? But unless I feel like I'm stable, like I just moved across the country, restabilizing a life here, like I'm not trying to solve a lot of the world's problems. I need to focus on me, my family, my community, and then I'm probably going to reach out and be like, okay, now there's this huge subset of problems. What do I want to work on and how do I want to solve? I think that food is the most important one. But yeah, I mean, I think so many people try, especially when they're removed from nature in large cities, they have this expectation that they're trying to solve these massive problems. And I think not building from that core of like you being solid yourself, being connected to nature, your family, etc., they get solved in ways that look like the lab grown meat, and they look like AI, and they look like all these things. Like where the disconnected problem solving leaves us very astray.
Totally. And I think like even just applying that to your own life, if you think about like all the stuff that you worked on with your diet and just getting better, all the research, and then applying that because you were able to build yourself and build a healthy core within you, and then also learn all this knowledge in that process, you're then able to help all these people do the same. And it's like, it really goes down to like that Jordan Peterson quote, before you try to save the world, make your bed. Like it's
exactly
so true, controlling what you can control.
Yeah, for sure.
So you said it has been 4 or 5 months now since you've kind of been off social media a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I've been on a little bit, but
Yep.
not really the same way I was before. I go in phases always. Sometimes these breaks are longer than others, but yeah, about 3-4 months. Some stuff has been posted, but almost nothing.
Yep. So what is that like? What clarity has came from that? Because oftentimes I think about how, because of social media, I consume so much more than I create. And when you're when you're consuming so much, it doesn't allow you to have the time to come up with original ideas. What do you think that time off social media has allowed for you, or just what perspective has it gave you?
It's given me a much more regulated nervous system. That's for sure. It's undeniable. I mean, more I'm on social media, the more I get upset with myself and others. And I've just noticed that to be a trait of mine, and maybe I'm just, fragile in that sense. But I noticed that, and it's like the first thing to come and go. As far as ideas, I think that social media can be great for a lot of reasons. I think it can be great at stimulating ideas. I think it can be great at getting exposure to a lot of things you wouldn't have known otherwise. So like, I don't think that it's complete evil and just the devil. I just think that with anything, there's a relationship with it. And sometimes relationships can need breaks or need different refining of it. And yeah, I'm just taking a step away while I build, having like just so many important things here of like creating a good foundation of our lives moving across the country. I just made a conscious decision to not spend a lot of time in areas that are really overwhelming and triggering to me, which again, like when I'm at capacity, like if I have like a stable environment and I have capacity in my day, it's not a big deal, but not the case right now. So just decided to make that shift and tune it down a little bit. And I'm sure I'll go back on, I'm sure I'll get involved, and then I'll notice myself getting pissed at strangers on the internet again, and then I'll probably take another break, but there's no like super defined formula for it.
And when it comes to the stuff you're building right now, definitely want to get into a bunch of those things. But one question that's been itching at me is 0 Acre Farms, and when they are getting into Chipotle. When can I start going back to Chipotle?
Oh, that would be a dream, man. We've been working on it. So yeah, I mean, 0 Acre Farms is something I helped sort of bring to life, and it's effectively doing a much healthier replacement for seed oils. So seed oils are just the toxic, ultra processed food-like substances that are made from taking seeds and pulverizing them and adding a bunch of chemicals, and then they make fat. That fat's not good for you. So this is using actually fermentation to create oils that are much better, much healthier profile of fats that we've been eating historically throughout all of human history. And I wish that Chipotle could switch to tallow and just use animal fats or use stuff like that. But again, talking to this guy in this podcast, using tallow would be an impossibility for a restaurant like Chipotle. So if we could get a healthy oil in Chipotle, oh man, I would crush so much of it.
But it is it coming? Because I was reading some things that Chipotle had come to an agreement with Zero Acre.
Yeah, they've been really supportive, but there's no, I mean, with a restaurant chain that big, they have to go through so many different trials to make sure that the cost, supply chain, taste, all these different things that they couldn't just roll out an enormous ingredient change. So
Totally.
this type of biz dev takes years, and team at Zero Acre is doing a hell of a job and doing a bunch of pilots with a bunch of different restaurants right now. Can't say which ones, but ones that you would for sure know of that are huge chains that would make me very happy if they switched their fats.
Yeah, would make me really happy as well. It's nice to have that peace of mind. Like,
yeah,
even just knowing all this information, it weighs on you a bit when you know the processing of how they're created and all this stuff. And when you go out to dinner, it's just like, just at the back of your mind, just a little bit, you tend to think about it. So it's cool to have those options that allow you to eat in a healthier way and a more relaxed, stress-free type of setting.
Yeah, it's tough for the people who get maniacal about looking where their food comes from. Because you certainly go through this like trough of despair.
Been there.
Yeah, and it's for me now just eating food where I know where it comes from and I've been to the farms is more important than the convenience that I get from eating out at restaurants and stuff. And so I just like I put the effort in because it means more to me than the convenience does. And that took me 20 plus years to get to that point. And so I don't expect people to do that. And I don't expect people to even care 1/10 as much as I do about the source of my food. Like, people need to pay their bills. They need to take care of their family. They need to do more important stuff. And for some reason I got fascinated with it when I was younger. And so, I mean, this is what then brings me back to the social media stuff of I hope people know about some of these things and don't have to do all the work that I've had to do to figure out where does the food come from? Where does it go? What are the ramifications, both health, environmental, ethically, et cetera. So it's a lot to juggle, man.
Yeah, absolutely a lot to juggle. And what do you think peace of mind has came from, like, growing a lot of your food and from just knowing the people that you get your food from?
What's the question again?
What is the peace of mind that has come from that?
I think it's more feeling connected and having a connectedness to the food system. I mean, when you think about it, your body's made of the food you eat, very simply. And for me to have a relationship to the food I eat is sort of like having a relationship with myself and the world at large. It's kind of a spiritual thing to me at this point. I'm going to die and I'm going to become food for other things too. And so for me to be intentional about what I become is just feeling more of like an interconnectedness with being alive. And yeah, that's something that just prioritizing that has led to more than just, again, looking at the outcomes of nutrients one by one.
Yeah, it goes back to what we were talking about before with the intellectual versus intuitive, and moving more towards that intuitive sense of, instead of trying to be this optimized, perfect thing, seeing what feels right, and almost more of that spiritual pursuit of where your food comes from and having this connectiveness to everything.
It makes things taste better. It makes meals more satisfying. I've enjoyed it.
Absolutely. So we touched on some of these topics and very quickly talked about seed oils. But the question that you've based all your work off of is, why are people so sick? And then how do we fix this? So I kind of wanted to get into a bit of the tactical stuff. Like, what do you think are some of the biggest issues that we're facing, and how do we deal with them?
Yeah, I think from a macro level, it hasn't really, like, my thesis hasn't really changed. It's that people are not living in the environment that they should be living in. And humans are outside of their natural environment, and that's the issue. That just keeps being reinforced year over year. I keep learning more and more stuff and changing my mind about what the biggest levers are to pull on that. At the end of the day, you have only so many to pull, though. And those look like food. And so for me, I try to simplify this as much as humanly possible for people. And in the food realm, like, eat food that's local and seasonal that spoils. If you do that, you're like solving most of the issues with the food. Movement is sort of a similar thing, where move as much as you can in as many different ways as possible. Um, as you see, like even with these first two, we have an entire environment that's the exact opposite of that. In terms of food, we eat the most processed, unreal stuff that comes from all around the world that can sit on a shelf for years at a time before it goes bad. Devoid of nutrients, devoid of any sort of life. With movement, like we literally sit, like I'm sitting right now in a chair, like we sit in this position, immobile, for the majority of our day. And then when we go into bed, we lay in the same position for the majority of the time. It's just insane. So we're literally doing the exact opposite of all the things that we should be doing. The next one that I've been freaking out about a lot lately is light and exposure to light.
Me as well. Jack
And
Cruz.
I think that he gets some stuff wrong, but I think that ultimately, like, he's a brilliant guy and he's doing a great job focusing on some of the things that people are ignoring. Like, for example, he just says like food quality effectively doesn't matter. I fundamentally disagree with that.
Yeah.
But I think it's one of the pillars that we do not take seriously enough. And I used to just be like, oh yeah, wear blue light blockers or do the whole thing. But especially since we moved, I started getting a lot of this of like grounding, light exposure, water, etc. And these are things, again, that like even more than food, it's simultaneously easiest and hardest thing to do. Easiest because it's literally free. You just go outside. Hardest because our lifestyles are set up in a way that make that effectively impossible. Most people have to work inside of an office, not by light, not by even a window. So restoring your natural light environment, which like at this point, like I've been, again, really going deep on it, could be a very important thing that people aren't looking at. That is, even if you buy a window and see light through a window, like you're not getting the normal amount of light. That's a big one. I think another one is emotional health and mental health, from the perspective of we used to have social bonds that would take care of a lot of the issues that we had. We had rituals, community, rites of passage, all these type of things around big events in life, around hardship, around positive things that we just don't have anymore. So our social structure around processing grief, having space for it. And like there's a book called The Wild Edge of Sorrow that dives a lot into this around our historic moving of emotions and how we effectively have none of that anymore. Mm-hmm. And we have now tools that you go to a therapist and talk about your issues that I think is completely useless. And how do you restore that? I think that some of these things are like, how do you restore a natural human environment? We don't talk about this a lot. We don't talk about how do we commune as a tribe, and how do we have support structures naturally so that we don't have to consciously manage this stuff. That's a big one for sure. So yeah, I mean, the list goes on and on and on. I think it's deviated so much over the years, and like my focus has gone. But again, the more I learn, the more it comes solidified that it's just about rebuilding our natural environment as close as we possibly can.
Yeah, and it's a holistic approach, and it's cool to see that evolution more towards this like soft side of things of light, grounding, water, emotional health. But one thing that you mentioned that I think is probably quite controversial, but I've never experienced it, so I have no thoughts on the topic. But you said therapy is useless.
It's useless. I think it can be useful for some people in the sense where they have an outlet to at least talk about an issue, and they have a container to talk to somebody about it. But I think as the modality of what it's trying to serve, like we will look back at talk therapy in 100 years as like one of the most dumb things that we did on the path to like trying to have a healthy human being, a healthy population. The DSM-4 sort of categorizing people with mental illnesses or trying to figure out what spectrum people are on and then working with them through that is, I think, is a huge mistake. And this is why we see, I mean, look at how many people are depressed and anxious in this country. How many pharmaceuticals we prescribe for anxiety, ADHD, to fall asleep, sleep medications, etc. It's not working. What we're doing is not working. And then you look at some of the things with, psychedelic assisted therapy and how much better that is. There's no talking in that.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very different level. I mean, obviously it's a very different conversation, but that what we're doing is not working. And the same thing we can say around like how we're managing chronic issues with physical health, not working. How we're managing chronic issues with mental and emotional health, not working. Neither approach works. We're not looking at the system fundamentally from restoring the issue from the first place. This is the thing of like all the interventions we're doing are likely necessary, but they don't stick because we're not fixing the underlying issue of an improper environment. And so the analogy I give often is if you have a train running on tracks, you have two things that are necessary. If like let's say it flies off the tracks, if somebody pushes the train off tracks, if the tracks, for example, get bent and the train flies off of the tracks, you have to have an intervention of getting the train back on the tracks, which is most of what we do in modern Western interventions. But what you also must need is a restoration of the natural environment. And so if you don't fix those tracks, the train's going to fly off over and over and over and over and over again. And so what we're doing with talk therapy, I think is even like a terrible intervention, but it's an intervention nonetheless. But we're not fixing any of the underlying natural environment of like how do people actually process and integrate emotions and deal with their mental and emotional health. And so until we do that, even like I see it in psychedelics, like I think psychedelics are an intervention for mental and emotional health, but they're not fixing the underlying issue. And so people go back to them over and over and over and over again.
It's such a interesting and great perspective. Like I was listening to this guy Gary Brecka the other day say that he's never seen a patient of his with anxiety or depression that didn't have some sort of gut issue going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there's so much going on there. To single out therapy as like the one modality that people should use is so ridiculous. And then on top of that, like everybody pays someone else to listen to them when they never even spend time to like listen to themselves. Like
Yeah.
all that stuff there's nothing special about the person there. It's like how many of those issues are just because you've never like talked through them by yourself.
It's tragedy, man. It's tough that we don't have, like, it feels like a burden. People feel shame to talk about any issues with their friends or their family, which again is like this destruction of our natural human environment, which was tribe-based, ritual-based, ceremony-based. It's all gone. Some people in some religions still have it and makes me envious.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I could get on board with like an organized religion. I just can't get there intellectually. But yeah, we have very few structures in our modern world to bring people together in community in a true way.
So, with all this said, like for that person right now who's sitting in a New York City high rise and they work a desk job, they're under blue light all day, they're living this sedentary lifestyle, they feel like shit, their mental health is in crumbles, they're eating kind of a standard American diet. I mean, there's so many things that they can be doing to um, change their physical and mental health. But what do you think the big 80/20 of that's going to be? Like, if you were to talk to somebody and they're like, look, like, I'm not ready to commit to uh, fully changing my diet and doing all these different things and going out and living in nature, like, what are the things that are going to get them what are the biggest movers there?
Yeah, I think that the best thing someone can do is the step that they're most excited to take, honestly. So like some of the stuff we talked about regarding eating real food, being more in relationship with other people, being outside in nature, sleeping better, sunlight exposure, movement, etc. At the end of the day, every individual is where they're at and they need to be excited about where they're going or else it just doesn't matter. And so you could say food for one person, but for somebody else, maybe freaking out about this light stuff is really what lights them up. No pun intended, but that's where it's like the journey has to be walked one step at a time. And it's like, what step is the most exciting for that person to take? What motivates them the most? And for maybe somebody has a lot of back pain and wants to play with their kids. And that's the biggest thing that motivates them to making a cascade of changes is like getting much more physically fit. So it just totally depends on the individual and what their objectives, motives, etc. are. I stopped trying to make general prescriptions a long time ago because that shit doesn't work. Like people need to be motivated and they need to be obviously given the right resources and education around it. And I think that's where a lot of this whole thing gets misconstrued. And I think that's where, unfortunately, most people, when they go on social media, try to find help for a problem, get very misdirected. And they're trying to like grab on to like something with substance. And really, there's no root to it. There's no rootedness. And they just rip this whole thing out of the ground. And that's generally what people do, is they're reaching for truths about what they're interested in. And most online information is bullshit. And so they don't get anywhere. That's the most tragic part about it. The upside is that they're exposed and they can find good information. A lot of people have found like truths for them on the internet, which is really awesome. But yeah, I always encourage people to like look at your human environment, try to learn a little bit about it, trying to learn about what's broken, and then whatever's most exciting to you to try to fix. If that's swapping out your house, like if you're a new mom and you learn that cleaning products are full of a bunch of weird chemicals that disrupt hormones and all this other stuff, like maybe switching out that stuff is like the first step. And then 2 years later, you start eating from the farmer's market. You never know how this stuff's going to go. But whatever you find interesting, I think is the most important thing.
Yeah, it's a great perspective. And like to that last part, a lot of times once you start to feel the effects of something, you kind of want to go all in on that. Like once you change the diet a little bit and you start to see the physical changes that are occurring, then you kind of start to have that motivation to go to the gym or to start grounding, to do all these type of things. Like the motivation kind of comes from the success. So taking that perspective of leading with the thing that you're most excited about, I think is a great way to think about it.
Yeah. I mean, the New York City high-rise living, man, it's tough to imagine rebuilding a really good zoo cage there for a human, but people do it, man. People live healthy, long lives there. And so I think there's a lot we still don't know. And maybe some people have certain predispositions to like really needing community and culture and inputs like that. And in the city, they get all of that. And it doesn't even matter what kind of food they eat. I mean, I'm just at the point of like, I see so many counter examples to what I believe that I try to always stay open-minded and think like, we probably don't know the whole picture here. Yeah, it can be tough. It can be tough to rebuild in the city for sure.
Totally. Yeah, I think about that for myself, like the how big of a struggle that would be to like live in this big city. But like you said, people do it and people have success with it. How do you think, like, did you try to justify that for a long time? Like seeing these people who would go vegan and have a lot of success, or seeing these people living in New York City, living these totally like unnatural lives that are kind of thriving to a certain extent. Did you try to rationalize that for a while?
I think like beginning of the journey, maybe, and like a little spiteful and a little dogmatic about stuff when I started getting into health stuff like 15 years ago, 10, 15 years ago. But I mean, I've just seen, again, so many counter examples, and I'm all about it. People feel great and they're like maxed out and they're feeling a full, happy, healthy, whole life. Keep doing what you're doing and don't change anything. And that's just like, I never try to be prescriptive, especially anymore, around what people should or should not do. I more of just try to observe around, hey, what are your goals? How are you feeling? And maybe help people try to figure out what's motivating for them and what they care about. And then enabling them with resources around that, helping them on the journey instead of like trying to force them down a path that I think is right. It's just, again, doesn't work. I think that's what I'm so grateful for regarding my clinical practice, is that you can only work with so many people until you find out like you really need to like figure out where the individual's at to help them on their journey and like enable them to walk the path. That's the only way it works ever. The hand holding doesn't work. The telling them what to do doesn't work. You have to figure out where their motives are and work with them on a one-on-one basis to like enable them to go on their own journey rather than trying to be prescriptive.
Dr. Anthony Gustin, what a pleasure this was. I really do appreciate you taking the time today. Is there anything else that you think is fundamental that we kind of haven't talked about yet?
Covered a lot, man. I think it's probably overwhelming for people who are into it. But yeah, I mean, I think we covered a lot of stuff. So just being intentional, I think, is another thing of that's a huge component in this. And like I said, of walking your own path and being an individual. If you're just intentional about what you want to do and what you want to change, you're ahead of the pack 99% of the way.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I had an absolute blast today, and I really do appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks, man.
Awesome. Good to go.